Hey, welcome back to the second installment of the Charles Berglund series. If you tuned in last week, you heard about him being assigned to the USS New Orleans and making their way across the Pacific. And in this second episode, you're going to hear a lot more about that. So check it out.
Anyway, we finished that operation, and then we went down to towards the New Guinea operations down there, and that was another landing for the Army and things down there for MacArthur. Of course, with the carriers and things, we did the preliminary bombardments and things like that there, and then that's when one of our carrier planes, a TBM, took off from the carrier and didn't get enough altitude, hit our back mast, and then hit the forward radar mast, and then fell onto the bow up there and killing one man that was on the 20 millimeter gun up there. Never did recover the bodies. They just plane burned, I guess, what I understand. And
well,
oh my gosh!
Here's a description in the book. The aircraft was from the Yorktown, which was steaming behind them, launching aircraft. And as he already mentioned, you could see all the task force around them. And just for our audience, the modern naval task forces aren't like that. I just talked to my dad, who's in Vietnam. He's on a carrier USS Ranger. He couldn't always see the ships, and nowadays you can't see them at all. Communications have gotten so good that you can have ships over the horizon and still act as a cohesive unit. But back then, they were sending signals through those little lights with little flippers on them and things like that, and talk between ship radios and stuff. They need to be closer. So close this happened. The aircraft was from the Yorktown. Upon hitting the yardarm, the plane tore off the after SG radar antenna, and the bottom of the plane was ripped open. Machine gun shells, oil, and gasoline were splattered from the boat deck to the bow. They were basically disengorged from this plane. The starboard yardarm of the foremast was bent forward at about a 45-degree angle, and a hole was put in the forward radar antenna. Then the plane caught fire and crashed on the bow just forward of the starboard 20-millimeter gun, taking out a piece of coaming where it crashed, and then fell into the sea. The plane exploded and blew pieces of debris and body parts onto the ship.
Oh.
I do not recall that the aircraft exploded, he wrote in here, but he's mentioning what other people saw that were in forward of the ship. In addition to the lost crew member, one sailor was injured when he jumped from the signal bridge to the gun deck as the plane passed directly over his head. All of the crew of the TBM, 3 men were killed. We had to continue with our mission. So all the men remembered this. They're supporting this landing in Hollandia, and one of their own planes from the Yorktown behind them hits the SG is one of the radars that they would have used. Some of them was ship radar, some was airborne radar. It disemboweled this ship, spewed machine guns and oil and gasoline everywhere, crashed in the forward part of the bow, killing one of their men, and all of them remember that because, until basically Okinawa, a lot of the men wouldn't see ships or airplanes crashing into their ships. In this case, it was friendly fire, but it would be later in the war that the kamikazes would be a common occurrence where sailors were used to seeing aircraft like running into ships and all the damage they did. But at this point in the war, that was relatively uncommon. So it was very memorable for them.
One thing to point out, you think, okay, this plane took off from the Yorktown. I thought that sunk at Midway.
Ah, yes.
Well, no. I mean, it did sink at Midway, but there was already a renamed aircraft carrier that was called the Yorktown that was in action by that time that this story took place. So I just wanted to clarify that because people might think, well, did he get the name wrong or something like that? No, there were 2 Yorktowns.
And it's funny you mentioned that because another storied carrier that was lost early in the war was the Lexington. And then there was the new Lexington, just like the New Yorktown, which were Essex-class carriers. They were much larger, more fit for purpose. The Lexington got sunk by multiple torpedo hits and bomb hits by Japanese in the Battle of Coral Sea in 1942. And I think I don't know if it was this raid, it was early in the war where the Lexington, the new one, got hit by a Japanese torpedo, and the New Orleans had to escort it back to Pearl in the same fashion that the New Orleans would have escorted the old Lexington back to Pearl Harbor if it had survived, but it didn't. There are famous photos of the old Lexington sinking. and there's a couple of ships right up next to it taking on the vast majority of the men. Very few American sailors were lost in that um, because of the damage control and because of the work of those ships taking those men, bringing them back to Pearl, could be put back on other ships. And one of those ships that took on like 500 of those men was the USS New Orleans.
My goodness. Huh.
So now we're going to roll on to the next clip. We just covered Hollandia, and now their next one is going to be in Saipan.
The next big invasion of Saipan. And that was a same type of operation, big fleet operation with lots of troop ships with Marines and things like that. Did our preliminary bombardments and things like that there, and then the invasion went on. And that's during towards the middle and towards the end of the operation up there, they got the word that the Japanese fleet was off to the west, and what they were planning, the Japanese, what I understand, had plans on sending all kinds of planes to hit our fleet and then land at Guam and things like that, and so they could refuel and get back to the carriers. But then the carriers and the cruisers and the battleships all joined up and headed west to confront the Japanese, and then the carrier planes took off and they just massacred the Japanese fleet, and they called it the Marianas Turkey Shoot because they shot down somewhat 400 airplanes. That's, I think, as far as the fleet went, they only one ship got hit by a bomb, one of the battleships. We did lose a number of planes because when they went out, it was quite a distance for them, and getting back was going to be a problem. And evening came and dark, and a lot of them hadn't gotten back, and running out of fuel. And so the admiral of the fleet, which normally you would never do, had all the lights turned on the ships, carriers, so the pilots could find them.
So did you also have your lights turned on?
Oh yeah, every ship had its lights on. Wow. And of course, a lot of them didn't make it back to the carrier. They just about made it. The land destroyers would pick them up. The next day, they picked up quite a number of survivors.
Yeah, we've covered the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot on previous episodes, but we'll just give the very high-level bullet points of it. After Midway, the Japanese air arm was decimated. These highly trained Japanese pilots that had wreaked havoc across most of the Pacific for the first 2 years of the war were gone, along with 4 of their main fleet carriers. The Japanese spent all this time from June of 1942 until this event in 1944, almost 2 years later, carefully rebuilding this amazing fleet arm, this air arm for their fleet. And they were going to sail out and just smoke us. That was their plan. And they went out and they launched their planes, and we launched our planes, and we had many more planes. We had newer planes. We had the Hellcat now. We had better planes. And the Japanese lost 600 planes that day. The Americans would lose 129, but only 29 were lost to like combat action. The other 100 or so were actually lost to what he just described, which were planes that were sent out to attack this fleet. They were successful, but on the way back, it got dark and many of them had to ditch. And most of the pilots were actually picked up by destroyers and could live to fight another day. It was a tremendous loss for the Japanese.
Yeah, we covered this in I think, wasn't it the Ira Bewley series?
Yep, that's
it.
Where
he describes in great detail what it was like flying back.
Yes, he was
night.
Part of that. Yes.
Yeah, at night on fumes, trying to find these ships. I mean, and this was the first battle of the Philippine Sea, wasn't it? Was that what this was?
Yes.
So, yeah, man. I mean, there was so much heavy fighting in those first few years of the war with the Navy over there. It's crazy.
Do you remember what Ira Bewley said about the lights?
It's
okay that you don't remember. So for our audience, if you haven't heard the Ira Bewley series, it's awesome.
It's a great series.
Yeah, I think he was he the radio man? I think he was the radio man.
He was a turret gunner.
He was a turret gunner because we interviewed one person who was a turret gunner and another person was a radio man. So he's a turret gunner. on one of these TBM Avengers, and he was part of the task force that was sent out to sink these Japanese ship that lost these aircraft. And what he said was, remember, he's in this airplane. He's like, everyone talks about the fleet turning on their lights to guide us back. He said, but you know what, Tony? He goes, we were so tired and so overworked that those lights were a distraction. They blinded us. They were shining the lights on our plane. He goes, we could barely land the plane because we were having like night blindness or light blindness
Yeah.
from them shining the lights at us. So
Yeah,
I
it's
thought
like meeting a car head on with the brights on.
totally. Totally. So these are the things you get from oral histories that you don't typically get from the books, is the people who were there that said, yeah, well, they may have wrote about that, but I know that. Now, don't get me wrong. They were happy that the lights were there and they could see what was going on. But he said that the side effect of that was it was really difficult to land.
Well, that's one thing I was going to say earlier that I'm glad you brought back up. Some of these books, like you've got from Bremerton to Philadelphia, that are these self-published books by these veterans of the actual unit or ship. Man, they're gold. They're so rare. A lot of combat chronologies or books that are written. There was a guy I interviewed a year ago or so who's since passed away, but he was the co-author on his unit history. And you go to try to find that, to try to purchase that now on the internet, and it's like $400 for that book because it's so rare, but it has so much firsthand account information. And these books like this, anytime I see something like that, I try to pick it up. If I find a unit history somewhere at a used bookstore or whatever, I try to pick it up because that you're going to get stuff that ain't nobody else is going to be able to cover in a book, that some historian or whatever, unless they've got a copy of the book too.
Yeah. So I just looked on Amazon. From Bremerton to Philadelphia by Carl Hartzell was published in 1997, out of print, limited availability. You can't even buy it.
Wow.
There's no price you can pay because it's not available. And here's how precious books like this are. To reinforce what you said, Ryan, is when I lived in Tulsa. Actually, there's 3 reunions that I was a part of, and you were a part of the last one with USS New Orleans. The first one in DC in 2007, the second one in 2010 in Austin. I think just a year or two later, we hosted a little mini reunion in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You set up the sound system for us, and we had a handful of these guys there. And there was a coworker of mine at the time named Scott Yanish, who through an incident that we described earlier as just this weird, unbelievable coincidence, where I walk into his office. He was like an IT guru. And that weekend was the weekend when you and I were emceeing this reunion in Tulsa. And I look on his wall in his office, and I've never been in his office before. I didn't know him at all. And there's a picture of the USS New Orleans on it. I'm like, what's up with that?
This is the stuff that gives you goosebumps.
So Gary
really
Steele,
does.
if you're listening right now, pay attention, because here's one of these right now. I said, what is that from? He goes, my grandfather was on that ship. I go, you got to be kidding me. He goes, no, I got all kinds of stuff at home. I go on eBay and look for artifacts for the USS New Orleans. I said, how would you like to go to a reunion for the USS New Orleans? And he looked at me. I go, Scott, you're not going to believe this, but tonight, because this was a Friday, me and a friend of mine are going to be, and I told him the hotel's name, with New Orleans survivors in Tulsa. He couldn't believe it. So he shows up there, and he's talking to all these old guys. He's recording them. They knew his grandfather. He told them stories about his grandfather that he did not know. And then he found out about this book. And when I got a copy of this book, I sent it to Scott Yanish, and he painstakingly took a hand scanner, not mashing it onto some sort of screen, and scanned this whole thing as a PDF so he could have a copy of it for his collection. That's how precious these things are.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. That's why, again, this is an episode that Tony and I have talked about. We've talked about doing an episode like this where we talk about all of these, I think, divine hands in it. You call them God winks. You can just call it cosmic strangeness. But all these things that happen to us that are really, the odds are so long. It perplexes you on how it could be just a coincidence. It's just crazy.
Unbelievable. Okay, so now we're going to play 2 clips back to back. We just talked about the Battle of the Philippine Sea, aka the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where the Japanese would lose their carrier air wing. Now we're going to talk about the Battle for Leyte Gulf, where the Japanese would lose the rest of their Navy.
Landing went very well, and then the Japanese had split up their fleet, and they were coming in two different directions to try to get to the landing force there to destroy them. And the ships massacred our ships. They laid in wait for them in that one straits there, and I guess they sunk quite a few of their Japanese ships. In fact, one of their big battleships and a number of cruisers and destroyers.
Were you part of the force that?
No, we were with Halsey, and we went north to meet a force that was coming around the other end, but it was a decoy force. It wasn't the real. There was a number of ships, but they did come around, so we went north with the carrier force, and I guess we sunk just about every one of their ships. They had about 4 carriers, but no airplanes hardly at all, because everything had been destroyed during the war. They just didn't have any resources after that.
During these actions, was there anything that sticks out in terms of what?
Oh, yeah, I remember when we were heading north to hit this decoy force, we run across, it was a light cruiser, I think it was, and some destroyers that we got. Our division fought with those, and I can remember these shells, when they come over, they kind of a whistle, you know. But of course, they're already gone, you know. I remember I heard the first one come over, and I went on the other side of the ship, as though that would do any good. But anyway,
so you could hear the.
Oh yeah, you know, you got a shell coming over, you hear it's a whistle-like sound, you know. But you could see these Japanese ships in the distance off there. They were on fire.
Wow. And it was that from your return fire?
Yeah, oh yeah, and the other 2 cruisers that were with us, the San Francisco and the Minneapolis.
So did you guys sink those ships?
Oh yeah, they were sunk, yeah.
He's talking about the Battle of Leyte Gulf. You know, this is the preeminent final big naval battle essentially in history at this point, you know. What was crazy about this, just for people out there who may not be well versed in the Pacific War and how things happened, this was would turn out to be the coup de grace for the Japanese Navy, you know. He talked about these aircraft carriers that the Japanese had that had no planes on them. You're like, wait, what?
Yep.
What was that? He said, well, it's because of the Marianas Turkey Shoot.
Yep.
The Air Force was decimated. They had no planes. And so what they did is they sent this task force around to be a decoy. And what happened? We fell for it.
Yeah. And he was part of the force that went with Halsey after this decoy.
Yeah. So Admiral Halsey saw that. He's like, oh, he sees, oh, there's their aircraft carriers. We got to go get them.
Yep.
And apparently, did we not have enough intelligence to realize that they didn't have any, that we knocked out so many of their planes that they didn't have any on those carriers? I don't know. But for whatever, it can be debated ad nauseum, and it will be forever, whether Halsey should have taken off after those. Because when he did that, he left us vulnerable. Yeah. One of the flanks was left vulnerable. And if you've ever read Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors, that features a group of ships that were really the last line of defense for defending the invasion of the Philippines with MacArthur whenever he returned to the Philippines. And so it's just such an amazing story. And the Battle of Leyte Gulf is such a complex, the layout of the islands and the Surigao Straits and all these different ways that the Japanese could come in from different angles. And my goodness, I really think, and I've said this a million times, Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, if you're listening, you really should do a series on the Battle of Leyte Gulf. This last stand of the Tin Can Sailors would be great.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the reason why Halsey and others went after that decoy force, it really speaks to how effective and dangerous the Japanese air arm was, because they did have. The reason they couldn't replace their pilots is because the vetting process and the training for Japanese air crews in the Navy, they're almost like Navy SEALs. It took them forever to do it. The United States found a way to industrialize training pilots where you can train them well enough that they'll be effective, and then get trained by people who survived earlier battles to pass on that knowledge and then go into the theater and then continue honing your craft. The Japanese were kind of like, we're going to make the best Swiss watch ever, when what they really needed was a bunch of Timexes. So, but
Well,
but because of that, they were really, really effective, and that's kind of why they flew in there. So what were you gonna say? Go ahead, Rhino.
well, I'm just going to say, but think about the way that our militaries, our air forces evolved. Okay, we needed to, like you said, train pilots not to be Swiss Army knives, but to be, a part of a cohesive team,
Mhm.
right? And plus, they could learn from all the previous pilots who had faced the Japanese.
the
They had those
Japanese
guys back in the States training them on how to take these tactics. And they're putting our pilots in better and better airplanes all the time.
Yep.
With technological advancements and superiority over the Japanese, who never evolved their Zero fighter throughout the entire war.
Yeah.
That plane was just a flying gasoline can. As soon as you hit it, it didn't have self-sealing fuel tanks.
Yeah.
It would light up like a Ronson lighter, and that was it.
Yep.
And these different strategies. Now, part of it was because their manufacturing base was also being hammered at the same time by our B-29s.
Mhm.
So it was just a death by 1,000 cuts all over the place happening to the Japanese military.
And so you hear a lot about like Last Stand, the Tin Can Sailors, and what happened with the invasion force. You don't hear much about what the decoy force did. And so there's an excerpt. This is the last excerpt I have from Carl Hartzell's book about what the New Orleans accomplished, and it was historic. And here's what they wrote. In mid-afternoon, a pilot reported sighting a damaged Jap carrier about 50 miles from our location. We steamed towards the reported contact, and shortly after 4 p.m., we had made visual contact. The carrier had been damaged during the earlier air attacks. It was only making a few knots. As we were closing, you could see through the glasses that the flight deck was crowded with crew members. They could see the Japanese working on damage control. A firing line was established with the Mobile, the Santa Fe, the Wichita, and the New Orleans in that order. Although the Santa Fe had claimed credit for the ultimate sinking of the carrier, I must admit that the only ships that I recall firing at the carrier were the Wichita and the New Orleans. The only ship that received any return fire from the carrier, because they had 5-inch guns, was the Wichita. But be that as may, the carrier was taken under fire. It continues. Hits were reported shortly after commencing fire. The spotter reported straddles and hits from shells using the dye that we were presently using. So they put dye markers in our shells so we could see which ship was close to straddling it. I'm certain that the Wichita had also hit her, but the Jap bugger had started firing back with a 5-inch gun. She must have been cutting her fuses so that the shells would burst in the air. There would be different colors as the shells exploded, and then the smoke would slowly drift downwards. The first burst was a good 2,000 yards short of the Wichita, and until the carrier could no longer fire, they continued to fire at the Wichita, but they were still short perhaps 500 yards. Here's how he finishes it. This isn't much of a trophy to be crowing about. Sinking an almost defenseless carrier, nearly dead in the water, but as far as I know, it was the only Jap carrier sunk by U.S. naval gunfire during World War II, and we got to see it go down.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That part is worth everything I read before. I know our audience is thinking, oh, that's heroic. You got this busted up flat top and you go in the cruisers and smoke it. It was that last paragraph that I thought was interesting because Halsey and others always dreamed of getting the battleships and stuff, and the Japanese too, within gun range of carriers and of other capital ships. They could really duke it out, and it didn't happen all that often. And it's interesting that one of the times it did was with this cruiser flotilla against a damaged Japanese carrier. So I thought that was a cool story.
Yeah, very cool.
Okay, so now we're going to talk more about some of the a whole bunch of campaigns that occurred after this as the Japanese were really on their back feet. And at this point in the war, battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa were going on. And our forces, and we talked about this as well in previous episodes, were literally ranging up and down the Japanese coast and just bombing plants and houses and trees and whatever we wanted. So we're going to hear a bunch of clips about some of the things that they experienced after this big battle in Leyte Gulf.
After that battle, we went to Ulithi Atoll, And we made for refueling and things like that there. And then we took off for a run on Formosa, which is now Taiwan. And on the way back, some heavy seas set in, and we were under air attack quite a bit. It was at night, of course, on the way back. And I think one of the cruisers, I think it was the Canberra, one of them got hit by a torpedo, and she had to be taken under tow. But that was the night this gunnery officer in number 2 turret, he had a intestinal blockage. And they had doctors wanted to operate on him right away because it was getting worse and worse, and ship was rolling pretty bad. I mean, it was heavy seas, you know, and couldn't slow down. If you slowed down, you'd be out of the task force, and you'd be at the mercy of Japanese planes trying to spot you, because they were flares and things like that they put out. And I had the operating room. That was my responsibility at the time. We used to alternate our duties, and started operating. The ship would roll. You know, it was pretty, you know, just a table, kind of like, you know, it wasn't most modern things, but and they'd pull the intestines out. You know, I had to put my arms around where where they were taking the intestine out, the incision, so they wouldn't roll off on the off the table and onto the floor. But anyway, he survived.
Wow.
So we were going to play back-to-back clips, but I think we'll stop here for a second. Yeah, I forgot about
let's
that
revel
part
in
of
this
it.
for a second, okay?
Yeah, let's think on this, as Johnny Cash would say. Yeah, so
Can you imagine holding your arms out and having, like, you know, somebody like a string of sausages, you know, like going across
you're looking for the
arms?
intestinal blockage. I don't know how long intestines are, many feet, right? Many tens of feet. At least for the small intestine. I have no idea how he did it. But what's interesting is this also kind of shines a light on. So he talked about all these battles. He's at battle station. He's on the deck outside watching all this happening. But his real job when battles weren't occurring was he was kind of the doc on the boat. He's probably 20, 21 years old this time, and he's operating on this rolling,
my
pitching
gosh.
ship, cutting this dude open, sifting through intestines, looking for the blockage. I don't know
And
what
he
you were
survived.
doing.
He said he survived.
Survived.
Did he did he have, how much medical training did he have?
He basically was trained stateside as a corpsman.
Wow.
So look, he would later on in later clips, spoiler alert, he'll stay in the Navy after the war. He would become like a well educated medical professional. At this point, he was kind of not that. And this is the sort of things he had to do. You either have somebody who knows a little bit about this stuff, or someone like us who doesn't know anything at all. And at that point, you just got to see if you can save this guy.
Well, I mean, I guess it's better to try than to not try and let the guy die. I mean,
Yeah, the guy's going to die
lose,
anyways,
right?
you know?
God.
So at any rate, and the next clip we're going to play talks a little bit more about the exposure he had with medicine, especially the early days of like antibiotics.
Did you mentally? I mean, that sounds horrible.
Yeah, I know, but you get, you know, it's you get used to it.
So it didn't bother you. It's just
No. He just held him in there till they found the blockage, cut it off, stuffed him back in, put a bunch of sulfidizing. You didn't have a lot of antibiotics like we have today, you know. It was sulfa for that. And penicillin had just really started coming out a year or two before that. So anyway, the guy survived.
And a little bit about that penicillin, though, you were explaining to me how it came to you.
When the first penicillins came out that we got, it came in what you call beeswax, and you had to heat it up so you could put it in a syringe and inject it, and you had to do it real quick, like, or it'd solidify again on you. So, but anyway, that's one of the things. It worked fine though. And
I didn't know
Wow.
that.
I didn't
know
either.
that. We talked about penicillin in an earlier podcast about how, you know, later in the war, around this time, 44, 45, it was more widely available to American and allies. The Axis forces never had access to it. I didn't realize that they shifted it. That now crap. You go to any freaking Walgreens and it'll give you a bottle of 500 of them. But back then, penicillin was still the super secret thing that was difficult to mass produce, a little unstable. Obviously, it was like a mold, and I didn't know that they shipped that stuff in beeswax. You had to melt it and then put it in a syringe.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about. Did it need to be raised to at least a body temperature type temperature? Because if it gets injected into you, it'd have to be liquid at body temperature. Otherwise, it would solidify again, right?
Think of all these things that you don't think about when you got a miracle drug, right? I mean, you leave some stuff in a windowsill and you see it kills a bunch of bacteria. And so now it's like, okay, we got an antibiotic, but how do we make it so that it can help humans? And it was not just, well, let's just scrape some of it off and put it on our tongue. It took years for us to figure this out, right? It was a thing, man. It was a thing. And for Charles and the men on the USS New Orleans, or the no boat as they called it, the fun continues. You think it's bad enough fighting the Japanese. Well, listen to some of the other things they were subjected to. Ryan, I think go ahead and play those two clips back to back.
14, 15?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Took off for another raid on Japan up there, and that's when we run into the typhoon. That was a terrifying thing. I mean, it just, I can remember going up to the bridge on the inside. You could go on outside or inside up there. And you go up the bridge, you looked out, and those waves were just seemed like as high as that bridge. And the ship would go down like that, and it just, the whole bow would just be underwater, and then it would come up. And all you're doing is just trying to keep enough propulsion to keep the bow into the waves. And that was the night 3 of the destroyers did capsize. And because one of the big reasons was we were refueling that morning, and they didn't get refueled, so they didn't have that extra weight, so to keep from capsizing. It did help, but 3 of them did capsize, and an amazing part of it, a lot of those people survived that.
Wow.
This one skipper, he just said that the ship was going over, went over on his side, and he said he just walked off into the water. And I forget how many. There was quite a few. I think there was probably about 600 were lost in that. But
how long were you in a typhoon?
It seemed like it was all day long, and then it was that evening that it subsided, or we got out of it one way or another.
So these guys that in the destroyer that capsized, they just bobbed around the water for how long before people were able to rescue?
Hours and hours. It was good 24 hours before some of them were found. But they tried to rescue. They put ships out and they tried to rescue them. They did find a lot of them.
What sort of damage did your ship in New Orleans?
Our planes, I don't know if we lost one. I know we lost one, was heavily damaged. I'm not sure about the other one. But, water was coming down the ventilating shafts and things like that there. It just, and you couldn't sleep. You couldn't do nothing because it was just amazing, pounding, all the time. And just.
So I imagine that all the sailors on board ship were just kind of gritting their teeth until they got through it.
Yeah, it was scary. You bet they were.
How much of a role were you guys experiencing?
Well, we took some good ones. I don't exactly remember, but we took some good rolls, though.
Wow, okay. Was there any controversy surrounding why the force went through the hurricane to begin with? I know the Navy...
Well, nowadays, you have all this communication. You didn't have this weather communication like you have today. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was just there. You didn't realize it till you were in it.
Wow.
But
let me ask you on a personal level. I mean, how scared were you?
It's real scared.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever been as scared as that, because, I mean, when you look out and you saw that, it was just, if you got out into it, or if you sunk, I mean, your survival chance was nothing, really.
I think it is, and I'm quoting, this is the after-action report from a book we have available about the New Orleans. I quote, "The typhoon that you guys went through, it was the greatest loss that we have taken in the Pacific without compensatory return since the first Battle of Savo Island."
Yeah.
That's how many ships you guys lost.
Yeah, we lost 3 ships and heavily damaged others. carriers, their bows were, bent down, planes were lost.
I mean, I imagine you guys didn't eat for the entire storm, right?
Well, I really don't remember. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think because I'm sure I think all the watertight compartments were closed. So, I mean, you were kind of stuck in your one compartment.
We tend to forget nowadays when we watch the weather and we have all these NOAA satellites that are, orbiting the Earth, and they can see hurricanes coming from when they first nucleate off the coast of Africa and everything. It's amazing to think. I mean, obviously we didn't have satellites back then, but he's right. I mean, it was really pretty crude the way we could predict weather back then. And even the jet stream was a new thing. The Japanese knew about it because they used the balloon bombs and sent them over to the US on the jet stream. But that was even a new concept and everything. And let alone, sailing into, some unbeknownst storm over the horizon. I'm surprised it didn't happen more often, to be honest, but it did happen more than once to Halsey.
I was just going to say it did, because so they called exactly. So the first typhoon, which Charles just described, there was a big inquiry about it, and Halsey was called out of the task force to meet with Nimitz and others, and they just really went after him. Yeah. He ended up being exonerated because his defense was, look, I can't predict the weather. Our weathermen are wrong all the time. I didn't get the reports in a timely manner. And of course, the weathermen at the time, the meteorologists, they felt kind of like, screw you, buddy.
You're throwing us under the bus, aren't you?
Totally. And then Halsey went through a second typhoon, which was just as bad as the first. And people were like, oh, okay. We know that the state of weather is not particularly good, but there's probably a few things that you need to take a cue from. And you're right about the jet stream, right? We didn't understand that when Japan was using balloon bombs. Why didn't they call it jet stream? I mean, the bottom line is it wasn't until after World War II, when we started having regular like commercial flights and everything going around the globe, that we started to understand, hey, I don't know what happened, but when I flew from west to east, from Boston to London, we saved an hour on travel time. There was something giving us a push, right? And so, yeah, on one hand,
it's got to be the rotation of the Earth or something there.
But how does it do that when the Earth is flat, Ryan? I don't understand how you get that, right?
Oh, now you're going to get letters. You're going to get letters, Tony.
Oh, crap. We're just going to lose some members of our audience. Oh, please stick with us. We can both live on the same planet, whether it's a sphere or whether it's flat. So anyway, we covered Halsey's typhoons in great detail in previous episodes. I just thought that description was great. He was there. And so now we're going to move on to this next clip is something that is really personal to me. So go ahead and play it.
So what happened to the ship and the fleet after you finally?
After that, we went back to Ulithi Atoll, and we got back there, and that was that one morning that I think it was the next morning or two after we got into the atoll that they. No, this was a Japanese submarine, one of the midget type, got into. This was before we went on the Formosa run. Got in and torpedoed a tanker, and it was burning there. And
was this the first encounter that the Navy had with these Kaitans, these mini subs?
I think it was, yes, yeah. Because the later one was, there was some later, but not that time. Well, anyway, we made that Formosa run, came back, and then after the typhoon, then we came in, and it was just before Christmas Day. They announced that we were going back to the States for repairs and things like that, because it all wore out, after that long a time.
Why would this clip resonate with me? Well, I'll tell you. One of the last conversations I had with my grandfather Dion before he died was about him being on the tanker USS Tomahawk in Ulithi Atoll and watching their sister ship blow up from a torpedo from a Kaitan. I remember my grandfather telling me this story. And I remember him telling me that the Japanese would attack certain areas of there. And I'm not sure if it's Ulithi with aircraft then. It might have been some other anchorage. And he was never more scared to be on a floating oil tanker, a bomb.
Oh my
And his
gosh.
job, he was on a 40 millimeter quad mounted anti-aircraft gun. And one of the stories he told me to this day that I'll remember, he said, we got a bead on one. And he said that ship came in, that airplane, and it was trying to crash into us, and it just exploded off our port side. And he said most of the wing came flipping in the air right in front of our gun mount, and he can still see the flash of that red meatball from that wing that flew across the front deck of their ship that they had just shot down.
Gosh. Wow.
And so when he talked about that particular thing, I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what my grandpa told me happened to him when they were in Ulithi Atoll.
So
And
was this a midget sub or a Kaitan? Because there's a difference.
yeah, I don't know which one it was. I said
Okay.
Kaitan in the interview. Yeah, I don't think it was a suicide sub. I think it may, I don't know. I just
Yeah.
know that
I mean,
they
at
were
this time in the
torpedoed.
war,
It
at
could
this
have been
time
a
in the war,
Kaitan.
it could very well have been,
Yeah.
you know.
I don't know. I just remember my grandpa didn't specify what type of sub did it. He just said that one of the tankers in this anchorage got hit by a torpedo, and people didn't know what was going on. So there's no planes in the air. And I want to talk about Ulithi Atoll. So Ryan, you and I have some friends as part of the Veterans Breakfast Club, right?
Yeah,
And so we've
that's
been on their
correct.
podcast. He's been on ours. Every Monday, they have some sort of
Oh,
veteran
it's a well-run operation there. Those guys are awesome.
So if you get a chance, listeners, please go to veteransbreakfastclub.org. They've got a bunch of articles on a variety of things, including people that they featured on that. And I'm going to read a little bit about the Ulithi Atoll that came from an article from the Veterans Breakfast Club, because this atoll was our truck lagoon
Very
at
true.
this point in the war. It was about 1,000 miles east of the Philippines, and it was a perfect anchorage for us to resupply and repair ships like the Japanese were doing in the Truck Lagoon as we were making our push into Iwo Jima and Okinawa. So here's just some excerpts from this relatively short article. It reads, if Admiral Chester Nimitz hadn't spotted it on a map, Ulithi might have gone completely unnoticed by U.S. forces as it island hopped across the Pacific. Such an oversight would have cost the Americans the largest and best anchorage in the world and the perfect location for staging its final assault on the Japanese Empire. So part one of this is Admiral Nimitz was the one that said, what is this little speck on the map? Because what it reads here is that the Ulithi Atoll is a coral reef so tiny and so remote that it's often left off maps altogether.
Really?
Yeah. So it was just amazing that it was on this map and that he saw it. And it's easy to miss if you're sailing across the equatorial Pacific. This reads, shaped like an oblong amoeba 15 miles wide and 20 miles long, the reef is a ring of 40 islets, only 4 of which are inhabited, and that rise barely 3 feet above sea level. The largest of these is 4 times smaller than New York Central Park. So these are really tiny islands. But Nimitz didn't care about the land. He didn't care about the islands. The atoll's value lay in the deep, calm, azure water at the center of the amoeba, one of the largest coral reef lagoons in the world. And a survey crew aboard the USS Sumner estimated that the lagoon could hold over 700 large ships comfortably,
Wow.
with
Wow.
plenty of room to spare for refueling, repair, maintenance, and storage operation. Such a vast naval base is far west. It was basically, San Francisco lies 1,000 miles farther from Ulithi than it does from London. Think on this. Ulithi Atoll, San Francisco, is 1,000 miles farther away from the Ulithi Atoll than it is from London, England. That shows you
That's
how big
mind-blowing.
the Pacific is.
Yeah.
The Japanese owned the island but didn't recognize the value. And so on September 22nd of 44, a bunch of Marines went on there, took the island. There's only like 17 Japanese soldiers on it. And then after we secured it, every day, dozens of ships brought thousands of welders. This is what America did so good. thousands of welders, riggers, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, and other construction workers to the atoll. The USS Ajax arrived to serve as a metal fabrication shop. The US Abitan turned salt water into drinking water. There was a barge just for ice cream churning. The floating dry docks were powerful enough to hoist battleships out of the water.
My goodness, really?
They turned this into an indispensable staging base for the invasions in the Western Pacific that included Leyte, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. So I wanted to just, first off, an homage to my grandfather, Dion, who's a big part of why I am interested in history and in oral histories. Secondly, a shout out to the Veterans Breakfast Club for writing an amazing article. And lastly, I wanted our audience to know about this important piece of logistic support that is absolutely needed to win wars. And pretty much everyone that I've interviewed who was in the Navy in the Pacific talked about the Ulithi Atoll because they would serve time in that anchorage getting repaired, fixed, refueled, rearmed, whatever.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry for the Ulithi Atoll.
Okay.
And is the Mississinua, is that the actual oil transport that was torpedoed?
I do not know the name of it, and my grandfather never said.
Yeah. Oh, well, it says right here, Tony. I think you've been vindicated. It was a Kaitan.
Oh, okay.
The U.S. There's a picture here in the Wikipedia entry for the Ulithi Atoll. It's a picture of the USS Mississinua burns while sinking following an attack by a Japanese Kaitan. And it was a fleet oiler.
Yep. Which
There
is
you
what my
go.
grandpa was on. The Tomahawk was a fleet oiler.
And it says major staging area, like you said, several sunken warships rest at the bottom of the lagoon, including the Mississinua. In April 2001, sport divers located the wreckage, and 4 months later, oil was observed leaking from the tanks.
Wow.
Several surveys were completed to determine the status of the wrecks and leakage. And anyway, amazing stuff.
It is. And so when he said this, even back then, right? Because my grandfather had passed before 2007. Even back then, I remember it's like he's talking about something that I remember my grandfather telling me about. And so, at any rate, I don't want this to be any more about me, any more of my family history, but I did want to stop there to unpack that.
Oh,
and now,
man, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. And it's amazing the degrees of separation it's really cool when you encounter someone that you don't know talking about something that somebody you do know talked about, and to make that connection and to be the link between those two people, it's really it's a neat thing. So.
I think it is. And it's really cool when we interview people and those connections are made. And this definitely did. So this was totally going to be a clip. And so now what we're going to go through is a series of clips. I might have you play probably the next 3 in a row, Ryan.
Okay.
He's going to talk about kind of going back stateside as the war ends and then making a decision on whether he wants to stay or not. And then his kind of journey into this post-war Navy. Well, you just heard an amazing story from an amazing man who was on an amazing ship, the USS New Orleans, as it fought its way across the Pacific during World War II. And there's more to come. In subsequent episodes in the Charles Berglund series, we're going to hear more not just about the post-war Navy, just a few clips from that, but we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Cold War submarine fleet and all the drama that went on with that. So please join us next week to hear a lot more of Charles Berglund's experience on these nuclear submarines.